Emma Dawson had long dreamed of the perfect home, a place where she and her two young children could find peace and a sense of belonging. When the opportunity arose to move to Maple Ridge Estates, a quaint suburban neighborhood just outside the city, it seemed like fate. The homes were pristine, the streets quiet, and the promise of a safe, welcoming environment was exactly what she needed after years of struggling in the bustling city. The house she'd chosen was nothing extravagant, a modest three-bedroom with a small yard and a wide front porch, all painted a soft, buttery yellow. It was warm, inviting, and she could already picture the children running around the front yard and hanging up their artwork in the windows. It was perfect. But no sooner had she unpacked her final box than she received her first unwelcome visitor, Karen Thompson, the head of the Homeowners Association HOA. With a clipboard in hand, Karen stood at the front door, a tight smile plastered on her face. Dressed in a floral dress that seemed slightly too formal for the occasion, Karen gave the impression of someone who reveled in the minutiae of others' lives. "Good afternoon. You must be Emma. Welcome to Maple Ridge Estates." Karen's voice was sweet but measured, almost rehearsed. "I'm Karen Thompson, head of the HOA. I'm just here to make sure you're getting settled in and to go over a few rules." Emma, still in the midst of unpacking boxes, smiled politely and extended a hand. "Thank you. We're settling in just fine." "Wonderful." Karen's smile grew wider. She glanced down at her clipboard, as if ensuring the universe didn't miss any of her wisdom. "I've reviewed your house's exterior paint color, and there's a small issue we need to address." Emma raised an eyebrow, unsure if she had heard correctly. "I'm sorry, what do you mean?" Karen, already flipping through her clipboard, didn't seem to notice Emma's confusion. "Well, your house is painted yellow, which, as lovely as it is, doesn't fit within the color palette approved by the HOA. We prefer more neutral tones, beiges, light grays, off-whites. Something less attention-grabbing." Emma's smile faded, the warmth in her chest turning to a cold knot. "Wait. You're saying that the color of my house is a problem?" Karen didn't look up from her clipboard as she nodded. "Yes, I'm afraid so. We have a strict policy here, you see, to maintain consistency in the neighborhood's aesthetic. You'll need to repaint the house to a more acceptable color. We can send you a list of approved shades." Emma felt her patience fraying. The house had already been painted when she bought it, and the yellow was not only cheerful but a reflection of her personality. "I'm really not interested in repainting it," she said, her voice steady despite the frustration building within her. Karen looked up, her expression unreadable. "I understand this may seem trivial, but it's a matter of community guidelines. If you don't comply, there will be fines. The board isn't flexible on this. We'll send you a formal notice in writing." The words hung in the air, sharp and final. Emma's fingers tightened around the door handle, her knuckles white. She was about to say something when Karen's smile returned, this time colder and more professional. "We'll be in touch soon." "Have a lovely day, Emma," Karen said, turning to walk away without waiting for a reply. As the door clicked shut behind her, Emma stood frozen, staring out at her yellow house. She had only just moved in, and already, it seemed the dream was crumbling. The notion of repainting her house was absurd, and yet here was Karen, armed with rules that bordered on tyrannical. It wasn't the first time Emma had encountered the suffocating grip of bureaucracy, but this felt different. This was her home, her sanctuary, and no one was going to tell her how to live in it. She glanced at the corner of the living room where her children had left their toys scattered across the floor, a testament to their excitement about the new place. She couldn't let them grow up in a place where they would feel stifled, where the simplest personal choices, like the color of a house, were scrutinized by people like Karen Thompson. Emma exhaled slowly, her eyes narrowing. This was just the beginning. She would not let this woman or her rules dictate her life. No, she would fight back. With a fire igniting in her chest, Emma walked to the kitchen, picked up her phone, and dialed the number listed on the HOA's welcome packet. The call rang several times before someone answered. "Hello, this is Karen Thompson. How may I assist you?" Emma took a deep breath, the anger bubbling just beneath the surface. I need to speak to someone about your ridiculous color restrictions. I'm not repainting my house. This is my home, and I'll paint it however I please. There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Karen responded, her voice icy and formal. I'm afraid you'll have to take that up with the board. But if you don't comply, we will be forced to issue a fine. You don't want to go down that road, Emma. Emma's grip on the phone tightened, but she kept her voice calm. Oh, trust me, Karen. I'll make sure you regret this. And with that, Emma ended the call. The challenge set. What Karen didn't know was that Emma wasn't just a new homeowner. She was a woman who would go to any lengths to protect her family's peace, even if that meant taking on the HOA itself. The battle was just beginning. Days passed, and the conflict between Emma and the Homeowners Association deepened. At first, she had hoped Karen's warning had been an isolated incident, a power play from one overzealous official, an isolated case of authority gone wrong. But Emma soon learned that this was no mere misunderstanding. The HOA, led by Karen Thompson, was a well-oiled machine, and Karen herself was its unforgiving leader. Emma's defiance had only sparked a full-scale campaign to bend her to the HOA's will. The first official notice arrived in her mailbox a few days after the confrontation. It was a single page, neatly printed, and sealed with an official logo she had come to loathe. First notice: violation of exterior color policy. Fine, $250. Please repaint your home to an approved color within 30 days to avoid further penalties. Emma stared at the letter for a long moment, her hands trembling slightly as she read it. She had expected something like this, but seeing the official sanction made it all the more real. $250. That was no small sum, especially with her limited budget. But the amount didn't matter. What mattered was the principle. She had expected the next few days to pass in quiet contemplation, a simmering irritation that would eventually fade. But when a second notice arrived, demanding that she pay an additional fine or face further action, Emma realized that the HOA wasn't just testing her resolve. They were trying to break her. Second notice: failure to comply with HOA standards. Final warning: fine, $500. Immediate action required. Emma's frustration exploded. How could anyone live like this? She wasn't just paying to live in a home. She was paying to be shackled by rules that had nothing to do with real safety, real comfort. They were about control. Control that Karen had twisted into an almost personal vendetta. That evening, she sat on her porch, looking at her house in the dimming light. The bright yellow exterior was like a beacon, a statement of her stubbornness in the face of authority. But that beacon was quickly becoming a target. Her phone buzzed. It was another call from the HOA office. This time, Karen was on the other end. Emma. Karen's voice was as sweet as ever, but there was an edge to it now, a hint of venom. I just wanted to remind you that you're running out of time. The fine has already increased to $500. If you don't repaint your house to an approved color by the deadline, I'll have no choice but to escalate this matter. Emma could hear the thinly veiled threat in Karen's words. She took a breath, her frustration boiling over. Karen, this is ridiculous. I'm not repainting my house. This isn't about color. It's about control, and I'm not going to be bullied by you or anyone else. There was a long silence on the other end. Then, in a tone that made Emma's skin crawl, Karen said, "You'll regret this, Emma. If you think this is over, you're sorely mistaken. You'll pay the price for your defiance." Emma slammed the phone down, her hands shaking with anger. She was done with the threats, done with the rules that didn't make sense. But she wasn't sure what to do next. She needed a solution, something that would finally force the HOA to back off. As the days passed, Emma's frustration grew, but so did her resolve. She began speaking with neighbors, some of whom had lived under Karen's watchful eye for years. They were all terrified of rocking the boat, afraid that speaking out would only invite more fines or worse, social exile. But there were a few who admitted, in hushed tones, that Karen's reign was oppressive. She had a history of targeting anyone who didn't fall in line, of fining them for minor infractions, and using the board's vague rules to do so. Emma realized that she wasn't just fighting for the freedom to paint her house. She was fighting against an entire system of control that had gone unchecked for far too long. One evening, after another miserable encounter with Karen, Emma was sitting at her kitchen table, scrolling through the HOA's bylaws, when she noticed something that made her blood run cold, then hot with anticipation. There was a clause buried deep in the bylaws that no one, not even Karen, had paid much attention to. It stated that any resident of the neighborhood could request an emergency board meeting if they had sufficient support from other residents. And in the case of a dispute, the residents could vote on decisions. It was a loophole, a glaring weakness in Karen's control. A plan began to form in Emma's mind, one that would not only defy Karen's petty rules, but expose the flaws in the HOA's very structure. She wasn't just going to fight this with her own words. She was going to organize. She'd gather the neighbors, the ones who had been silently suffering under Karen's reign, and together, they would confront the HOA in a way it had never been confronted before. The next morning, Emma made her move. She took to the streets, knocking on doors and speaking to her neighbors. At first, they were hesitant, but as Emma explained how she'd uncovered the loophole in the bylaws, they began to see the opportunity. This wasn't just about the paint, it was about taking back control from the people who had been manipulating the system for their own gain. She began to rally support, quietly but steadily. Each conversation sparked more outrage, more support, until she had a small army of neighbors willing to back her. Emma was no longer the lone, frustrated homeowner. She was becoming a leader, a symbol of defiance. As the days ticked by, she prepared to make her next move. Karen had underestimated her, but she wasn't going to make that mistake again. Emma wasn't just going to play by the HOA's rules. She was going to rewrite them. The day of the emergency board meeting arrived, and the weight of what Emma was about to do hung heavily in the air. She stood in front of her mirror, adjusting the collar of her jacket, staring at her reflection with a mixture of anticipation and determination. This wasn't just about her house anymore. This was about taking control of her life, of exposing the corrupt power dynamics that had festered under Karen Thompson's rule. She had fought too hard, made too many sacrifices, to back down now. The community center where the HOA meetings were held was buzzing with tension when Emma arrived. A small crowd had gathered outside, the murmurs of her supporters blending with the general hum of curiosity. Some were her neighbors, people who had never dared to challenge the HOA's iron grip but had quietly watched as Karen's reign grew more oppressive. Others had become disillusioned with Karen's tactics, finally willing to take a stand after hearing Emma's plan. Emma greeted them all with a smile, though the nervous energy in her chest threatened to spill over. The moment the doors opened, she stepped inside, greeted by the cold, sterile atmosphere of the meeting room. The wooden table sat in the center, with familiar faces already in their seats, the HOA board members, each one stiff and uncomfortable under the fluorescent lights. And at the head of the table sat Karen Thompson, her perfect smile faltering as Emma entered. "Ah, Emma," Karen said, her tone sickeningly sweet. "I see you've decided to join us. I trust this won't be another attempt to avoid following the rules." Emma stood tall, unfazed by Karen's attempt at condescension. "I'm not here to avoid anything, Karen. I'm here to make sure the rules are followed, by everyone, including you." A hush fell over the room as Karen's face tightened. She clearly hadn't expected such boldness. "I'm afraid we're not here for personal grievances, Emma," she replied, her voice tinged with icy authority. "Oh, I think this is very personal," Emma said. "But it's also about something much bigger than my house. It's about the way this HOA has been run. The way you've used your position to target homeowners for trivial offenses. The way you've abused your power." Karen opened her mouth to retort, but Emma continued, her voice rising with confidence. "You see, I've done my homework. The bylaws of this HOA give residents the right to request an emergency meeting if they feel their rights are being violated. And after the fines, the intimidation, and your overreach, I think it's safe to say that we're well within our rights." Karen's smile wavered, her eyes narrowing. She clearly hadn't anticipated anyone, least of all Emma, challenging her authority so directly. Emma turned her gaze to the other board members, who had remained silent until now, watching the exchange unfold. You're not here just because of me. You're here because this community is tired of being controlled by one person's idea of what's acceptable. She looked at each of them in turn, her voice steady but fierce. I've spoken to enough neighbors to know that they're ready for change. They're ready to have their voices heard. The silence in the room was deafening. For a moment, it seemed as though Karen might speak up, but she remained silent, her composure slipping. Emma's heart pounded, but she kept her focus. Finally, one of the board members, a man with graying hair and a weathered face, cleared his throat. I don't think we're here to discuss the past, Emma. We're here to discuss the matter at hand, the color of your house. He sounded like he wanted to move past the tension, back to business as usual. But Emma wasn't done. She held up the letter that had been sent to her, the one that had sparked this entire revolt. This, she said, her voice cutting through the air, is the problem. The HOA's rules have been used as a weapon against homeowners, creating fear, division, and resentment. The fines are just the beginning. Karen, you've used your position to bully this neighborhood, and it's time for it to stop. Karen's eyes flashed with anger, but Emma could see the cracks forming in her carefully constructed facade. You think you can just come in here and overturn everything? Karen asked, her voice trembling. You don't have the power to make these decisions. You're one person. Emma smiled, her hands steady at her sides. I'm not just one person. I'm the voice of everyone who's been silenced by you. And today, I'm here to show you that the rules of this community don't belong to you. They belong to us all. With that, Emma turned to face the others, her gaze meeting the eyes of every board member in the room. She wasn't just challenging Karen anymore. She was challenging the entire system. And as the minutes ticked by, Emma knew there was no turning back. Here's how it's going to work, she said, her voice commanding the room's attention. We're going to hold a vote. Not just about the color of my house, but about the leadership of this HOA. You've had your time, Karen, but your reign of fear is over. Karen's face twisted in outrage, but Emma didn't back down. She was no longer afraid. The moment of truth had arrived. And this time, the power didn't rest with Karen, it rested with the people. The room was thick with tension as Emma's words hung in the air. For a moment, no one moved, the silence oppressive. Karen's face had drained of color, her lips pressed into a thin line of barely contained rage. She had been caught off guard. Emma was no longer just a defiant homeowner, but a force to be reckoned with. And now, the other board members were beginning to shift in their seats, their faces unsure, their loyalties uncertain. Emma could feel the eyes of the room on her, the weight of her supporters' quiet presence behind her. This wasn't just about her. It was about every neighbor who had ever felt intimidated, every person who had ever whispered their frustrations only to see them dismissed by Karen's iron grip on power. You think you can just waltz in here and take control? Karen spat, her voice dripping with venom. You think this community, is yours to command? Emma stood her ground, every inch of her body resolute. I'm not here to command. I'm here to remind everyone that this neighborhood doesn't belong to you. It belongs to all of us. We have the right to shape our community, not be ruled by one person's ego. Karen's eyes flickered with a dangerous glint, but Emma could see it now, doubt. The mask of authority Karen had so carefully built up was starting to crack. I'll tell you this, Karen said, her voice now laced with thinly veiled menace. You'll regret this, Emma. If you think I've been harsh before, you have no idea what's coming if you manage to sway these people. Emma's heart raced, but she didn't flinch. You've already pushed too far. The damage is done. The people are tired of living under your rule. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room, and Emma's supporters, those brave enough to challenge the status quo, shifted in their seats. They were with her. This was their moment. Let's have the vote, Emma said, her voice firm and unyielding. Let the community decide. Let them choose whether we continue down this path, or if we take control and make this HOA about what it should be, a force for the good of the people, not a weapon for the few. The board members looked at one another, uncertain, but one by one they nodded. They knew Emma had the support. They could see the cracks in Karen's facade, and they could sense the growing unrest that had been simmering under the surface for years. Karen's fingers clenched around the edge of the table, her knuckles white. "You'll never win," she hissed, but her words had lost their bite. The vote was called. Each board member cast their ballot, their pens scratching across the papers in silence. Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she watched the process unfold, the weight of what was about to happen pressing heavily on her. The moment would define her, not just as a homeowner, but as a symbol of resistance. Karen leaned back in her chair, her lips curling into a smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. She believed she had this in the bag. She'd always won before, after all. Emma was just a newcomer, an upstart. She didn't understand the way things worked. But as the votes were tallied and read aloud, Emma could see the subtle shifts in the room. The first board member voted to stand with her, then another, and another. Karen's face twisted into an ugly scowl as each vote against her was announced, her sense of control slipping away like sand through her fingers. By the time the last vote was read aloud, the result was clear. The HOA board had voted to strip Karen of her position. A stunned silence filled the room. Emma exhaled, feeling a surge of relief and triumph wash over her. But there was no time to bask in it. This wasn't over yet. It was only the beginning. Karen stood up suddenly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You think this changes anything?" she snapped, her voice dripping with venom. "You think you've won? I'll expose you for what you are. You'll regret this. You haven't seen the last of me." Emma faced her, the fire in her eyes steady and unyielding. "I'm not afraid of you, Karen. This community has spoken. You're done." With that, Karen stormed out of the room, her heels clicking against the floor like a final, furious drumbeat. The door slammed shut behind her, and the room erupted into applause. Emma's heart swelled as the noise around her grew louder, her supporters rising to their feet, clapping, cheering, and exchanging high fives. The battle had been won. But Emma knew there was still much work to do. The meeting adjourned soon after, the members of the HOA shifting into their new roles. Emma was appointed to the board, not just as a member, but as a voice for the people, someone who would never let the power dynamics of Maple Ridge Estates return to the way they had been. As Emma walked out of the community center, the sun setting behind her, she felt a quiet triumph. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it would be one she walked with her head held high, knowing that the fight for fairness and freedom wasn't over. It had only just begun.